A Strange Man and His Cat by Kevin Bennett. It's a poem at the beginning. When the moon and sun run red with blood and the seas begin to boil, when men work sinking through the mud and live despite their toil, when figs are ripe and wars are cresting, ready soon to fall, with sons and daughters second-guessing elders' moral call, when all the world reports to one who vows to cleanse the earth, when mothers are cursed by their sons who've learned to hate their birth, when lies and hate replace the truth, so eyes are blind to see the errors born from fragile youth cannot salvation bring, when elect remnants falter, stumbling, as the world conspires to eradicate the humbling truth behind their fire, when men are killed for having love, to purge the world of life, then know that soon will come the dove for reaping grain grown ripe. Prologue. When Kirill came of age. We know that they are lying. They know that they are lying. They even know that we know they are lying. We also know that they know we know they are lying too. They of course know that we certainly know that they know we know they are lying too as well. But they are still lying. In our country, the lie has become not just moral category, but the pillar industry of this country. Alexander Solzhenitsyn. Kirill saw his opportunity and ran for his life. There was not a lot of time, but he had about a 20-second lead on the government men. Even many decades before the Soviet Union collapsed, full infrastructure in remote regions of their massive territory was less than optimal. They had Kirill in a residential housing facility where one section of the building had been converted for government needs. If you asked Kirill what those government needs were, he couldn't have told you. He was 10. This gave him a simultaneous advantage and disadvantage over the government men. He was little and easy to control, true. But because of his size and station in life, he knew all the nooks and crannies of the building, of which there were many. Soviet architecture at its best had a veneer of quality, but at its average was astonishingly incomplete. Many housing facilities in the Siberian regions were never even finished. Certainly, this is intolerable for adult citizenry. But for children, such buildings represent a fine, non-traditional playground, often one finer than the soulless skeletal facilities on the grassless government grounds in the center of a given residential complex. Kirill knew where there were holes in the walls. He knew the government men were hustling him to a room they assumed was merely unoccupied. There was only one exit for the coffin-like apartment. Not even the bathroom was closed from the rest of the room. Also, the windows didn't open. But there was an empty closet hidden by a thin door, and that closet had a single wood panel at the back about the size of Kirill and was not attached to the wall behind. The reason was, shall we say, creative electric wiring inside said wall that frequently required access. If you opened the closet and didn't know any better, it looked like any other. If you were a bored 10-year-old living in Soviet poverty, out finding a reason to explore all areas of a given property with friends, imaginary or otherwise, then you investigated further, and as you investigated further, you discovered secrets. So they dropped him in the room and left for what would be less than a minute, as the man in charge was notified. They had not bothered to tie or cuff Kirill's hands. He was young and puny. This would be a fatal mistake. But you try and organize a remote KGB outpost in the middle of Siberia with locals who speak 2 or 3 regional Yakuts dialects before they even encounter Russian. Half the local Siberians the KGB employed for one thing or another grew up herding caribou. They were like pygmy elves of Father Frost. Several gentlemen of such stature locked the door behind them as they deposited Kirill in the room, empty save for 2 flimsy chairs and a foldable table. Kirill didn't hesitate for the time it takes to glance. He was sprinting for that closet, pulling out the wood panel, squeezing behind it, and carefully securing it back in place. It all took about 5 seconds. Now he was crawling through walls, worming his way between uneven boards and tangled wires. He had to make a right angle, and he would shortly come to a bit of rotted wood near a storm drain he could break through easily enough. It was about 6 meters of maneuvering, all told, but he had to creep his way through the walls carefully, not solely for the rat families he discomfited along the way. He'd been at it a good 15 seconds when he heard 3 government men return, making angry, muffled explanations behind him in a combination of local dialects and the proper tongue spoken in Moscow. "He's gone! Is the right room? Is the only room! Better find him or be gone yourselves before I see you again, comrades. Ugh, he's not under the table. Shut up, Mikhail. 2 valuable occult assets gone. Finding their hooligan spawn is vital. Of course, of course. Господин, in here, in closet. They have not attached back wall. Твою мать! Kirill heard this lax expletive as an echoed curse that reverberated after him through the infrastructure, indicating they had removed the panel. He was around the corner. He could hear one of the men pushing his way into the walls. Kirill felt panic rising and fought it back. There was the rotted wood. He kicked it in, rolled into it with his shoulder, and quickly came out the other side. Darkness, his newfound friend. It was the height of summer, and in no other circumstance could he have survived the outdoors longer than a scant handful of minutes. First he ran along the side of the building, crouched low and in the opposite direction of that portion currently used for government needs. It was also exceptional luck they had thrown him into an empty room on the first floor of the complex, or he would have really been in trouble. Even so, Kirill knew when they realized where he had gone, the government men would be out of the doors on the north end of the building in an instant, and they'd be coming fast. The building was a good 50 meters long. It took Kirill another 20 impossible seconds to reach the far end, the southern end. Each second took a lifetime as he fought against all instincts to scream. He focused his mind on escape, and he whispered as he ran, "Help me, Father Frost. Oh, Didya Moroz, help me." This, because Father Frost was the closest thing his young Soviet mind knew of God. Kirill did not trust Uncle Joe enough to make any similar benevolent associations, despite the propaganda. He'd already seen much as a child. And though there was an Uncle Joe, and no Father Frost, there is also a Father God, and he heard the heart of young Kirill. A subtlety of that moment ultimately saved the boy. When the Yakut's KGB man named Mikhail finally pushed his head and shoulders through the rotted wood of the housing complex into the summer Siberian night, he suddenly had the thought to look first north, then south. Mikhail swung his head that direction barely a moment after Kirill had rounded the corner of the housing facility. With no snow to reveal footsteps, Mikhail had no idea which direction the child had run. He pulled his head back in and called behind. "Wood is broken out, but I don't see him." "Who broke out the wood, Mikhail? Who broke it out, you idiot? Твою мать!" came the muffled response, followed by the sound of furniture being abused. Mikhail sniffed. "Well, it could have just been that way. Go get him!" Of course, of course." And Mikhail turned back to the rotted wood and shouldered the rest of the way through, immediately running as fast as his shepherd's legs would take him the wrong direction. Meanwhile, Kirill made the tree line in another minute and wound his way from pure instinct through thick Siberian summer foliage to the deer trail that led several kilometers to his family's dacha on the summer home's property. Dacha is the Russian word for summer home. That same dacha was where his mother and father had been taken just hours before. He fought tears. His family was not rich, but they were in government. Rather, they had been in government as some sort of scientists or priests or something. Kirill didn't fully understand what they did. He knew they had access to more resources than most, chief of which being a nearby dacha locals had long regarded as the domain of Baba Yaga. Access is the key word here. They would live in that strange place, but sporadically. For most the winter and most of the summer, their home was ramshackle Soviet housing, like everybody else. Kirill remembered hearing stories after he had finished moving into the apartment complex. Other young Yakut's children who did not live in the traditional way, but had been compelled to embrace Soviet rule, told him all the tales of the frightening supernatural goings-on in those woods. Locals had disappeared for many generations. In light of this, when his parents conducted their investigations at the dacha, Kirill watched, and he had seen what happened to them. He had seen it with his own eyes. It wasn't horrible at first. First, he'd seen them come and go with Mama Kitty. That was the name of the special cat. He had followed into the twilight place between the powder walls and glowing roof, near the impossible sea. They'd never seen him, but he'd come out the other side and even followed them back. He knew where that twilight place led. He knew why it was so important to the government, even if he didn't know what it really was. But when Kirill had seen what ultimately happened to his parents, it was as much loyalty as it was confusion and fear that prompted his report to the government office. There were no phones or other communications equipment at the dacha. He had returned to the Soviet installation all on his own. Somehow, though, they already knew. It was an issue of secret communications, and his parents had fallen out of contact long enough. It drove the government men wild. Kirill suspected his mother and father might have died, but the government men absolutely believed this to be the case, and the way they incidentally communicated as much to Kirill could not have been worse. They thought he was out of earshot and ignorant. The concept they put forth to explain the disappearance of his parents was simple and elegant: parricide. They would make him out to be a killer to hide their own mistakes. It was always the citizens of the Soviet Union, secret kulaks, who committed the crimes. It was never the government. Young and uneducated though he was, Kirill was not naive. He waited for his chance. He saw it. He took it. And they would have a devil of a time finding him now. He fought tears and loss of breath as he continued to run from the death behind. His parents had never mistreated him, but he knew those with whom they worked were harsh, and deep down he'd always suspected what that meant. Kirill was young and perhaps only of average intelligence, but again, he was not naive. Caution and an instinctual wisdom propelled him to spy on his kin, and this collaterally saved him. Over a hill of ferns, around a thick tree, through the smallest of openings in an array of shrubs, he was here. A dozen meters off was the circular dacha, covered in wood to hide the metal or whatever that reflective material was beneath. Kirill didn't slow for a moment. He ran around to the back of the building and into the underbrush. Generations of seasonal meltwater had carved a ravine hidden in the foliage. In the ravine was a little hollow beneath roots of a tree that was dry. In the hollow were half a dozen kittens that cowered deeper into shadows as he scrambled by their home. When he reached into the hollow, they started making panicked sounds, except for one, who already knew Kirill well enough to recognize his scent. He pulled the little animal out and held her in the shadows, a scant silhouette against starlight filtering through the high trees. She was a long-haired, wall-eyed, midnight black kitten, barely a month old, mostly weaned. She was elongated, but had pint-sized little legs. Squeaked the kitten. Of course, Kirill replied. We'll find her. The other kittens took up the chorus, but Kirill could only bring one, and he knew half those infant cats were troublesome. They all had the strange talent of their mother, at least in theory, but with this little one, Kirill was sure. The government men did not know of the twilight place. They could not. Kirill's own parents had only just broken through. And as mother and father had broken through, now Kirill would too. So he did. Indeed, young Kirill escaped, and would never again in his life see those KGB goons, or his childhood.